Throughout the Western world, the restrictions that have been placed on ordinary good people under the guise of fighting a virus have been beyond excessive. But I think the city that wins the award for most totalitarian goes to Melbourne in Australia. It seems like there's constantly a battle for who can be the most fascistic between Britain and Australia. It's been going on for a while, but in this case, Australia wins. Melbourne is the capital city of the state of Victoria, and there the Premier, which is like the governor of the state, Daniel Andrews, declared a state of disaster. And under this declaration, he basically gets all kinds of powers to do whatever it is that he wants, to impose any authoritarian, restrictions that he wishes, almost without limit. And, I looked through the different restrictions that he's placing on the lives of the people of Melbourne, and it's shocking. But I'm mentioning this to, I think I have a pretty international audience, but to Americans especially, know that this is coming here if you don't stand up and say no. Because, you've got governors around the United States who keep pushing and pushing and coming up with more and more totalitarian rules without, by the way, the authority to do so. And if people don't start fighting back and asserting their rights, there is no limit to what these governors will do. Now, back to Melbourne. The new set of rules, again, under this state of disaster, bans people in Melbourne from travelling more than 5 kilometres, which is essentially about 3 miles, from home to go shopping or to exercise. So you better hope that there's like some big store within a very short distance away from your home. And to enforce this, they've got checkpoints. And what we mean by checkpoints are basically military-style roadblocks set up to question you about where you're going and where you've been and how many times you've been on this trip. They also have this curfew that's going to be in place for the next 6 weeks. Most of these rules are for at least 6 weeks. The curfew, like you're a child, is there so that you can't go out between the hours of 8 p.m. and 5 a.m. So in the late evening to throughout the night. You're not allowed to leave your home. You're just required to stay in, except for if you're working, getting medical care, or caregiving. Those are the exceptions. Anything else doesn't really matter to the state. You're required. Then, people are only allowed to leave once a day for essential supplies, such as, food, and for 1 hour for exercise. Does that sound familiar to anybody? The idea that you get out for 1 hour to exercise? That's what we do here in the US for prisoners, for exercise. Yes, they have to be allowed out for at least an hour a day. That's the prison system. That's what's being, placed upon innocent citizens in Melbourne. They have to go within this 3-mile radius around their homes, like a 3-mile wide prison block, essentially. And that's where they can exercise for an hour. Well, that's where they can go and get their food once. Only once, though. If they forget something, you just can't make that food that day. You can't go back out. They've closed the golf and tennis venues. By Monday, they're just required to close. And you can't exercise in groups of groups of more than 2. Even when you live with them. So only 2 of you can go out to exercise somewhere other than playing tennis, apparently. Because tennis is somehow arbitrarily bad. And if you can come back home and be in your family group, but you can only go out to it. This is the ridiculousness. It's just like rules for the sake of rules. Rules that have no bearing upon health whatsoever. None. In fact, it's contrary to health. If you want health to tailspin, this is how you do it. You force people to stay in this confined area. You prevent them from getting good nutrition. You make it harder for them to, make these good decisions. You limit the amount of exercise that they can get, the amount of outdoor time that they can get, the amount of fresh air that they can get. They're creating like a recipe for an out-of-control epidemic? Why? That's the natural question, is why, other than to give the person, i.e. the premier or the governor, even more power, more excuses to wield his power. That's what it seems like. And at the same time, you've had, throughout the state of Victoria, you've had people queuing up outside different grocery stores for food. There's essentially a food panic. food shortages because people are panicking. You have basically two major grocery store chains, and together they make up 80% of the market. One's called Kohl's and the other's called Woolworths. And there have been lines outside of these different stores, people trying to get food. And now, Woolworths, one of those two massive chains, is restricting how much food you can get. You can get 2 of certain essential items. Again, 2 of the essentials. So you can get, and that, by essentials they're referring to dairy, meat, vegetables, fish, and toilet paper. You only get 2 of those things. So imagine this, all right? So you're living in this prison-like system, and you're concerned about food. You're concerned about your family. That family which may be getting sick because of the conditions in which they live. And now you can't even, kind of abate that feeling that maybe you're going to run out of food because you can't go and get, a little bit extra. No, because that's not even an option anymore. You can't go more than 3 miles. You can't go to another store. That's not an option either. But I hope that store doesn't run out of stuff. And this state of disaster empowers police to enter people's homes without warrants for what they're calling spot checks, whatever that means. It seems to be undefined. But even if the homeowner doesn't want the police in, the homeowner doesn't have a choice. The police can just enter and go on a fishing expedition of sorts for whatever it is that they're looking for, whatever violations they're looking for. All under, what here in the US we'd probably just call a state of emergency. But, it's the same thing. Oh, there's an emergency, therefore we get whatever power to do whatever we want. That's the logic. Also in Melbourne, no more weddings. Can't get married. No happiness allowed, it seems. Funerals are limited to 10 people. Because you can't even give the people who you care about, your loved ones, a proper goodbye. You can't even grieve properly. Now this, when you put all of that together, it's beyond Orwellian. It's just evil. It really is evil. And like I said before, this is coming here. This kind of totalitarianism is spreading like a cancer. And part of the reason, I think, is because people aren't speaking out. So please, start speaking out. Be defiant. Maybe it's not too late for civil disobedience to be enough, for civil disobedience to work. Because if it is too late, or if it gets to be too late, then something much worse ends up happening, and that's civil unrest. And here in the States, I think people are compliant with some of these unreasonable orders because they're being bribed. They're being bribed with stimulus checks, which are, these one-time checks, though there may be another one coming. And then at the same time, these unemployment checks that are vastly bigger than a regular unemployment check would be. I think it was $600 a week in addition to your regular unemployment. And so in a lot of cases, that's much more than the person would earn if he were working. So it's a type of bribe, and people are accepting it, accepting the rules because, well, I'm getting paid more than I did when I was working. But sooner or later, the money will run out. And when it does, when the economy fails, we'll all end up starving. And we'll be starving, and we won't have our rights either because we will have traded them for that money. Our politicians, and to some degree, people in general, have made a deal with the devil, and we're all going to end up paying for it. It's kind of like, it's the equivalent of borrowing a large amount of money from a Mafia loan shark, knowing that we won't ever be able to pay it back with interest. Someday, that Mafia loan shark, he's going to show back up. And the truth is, that day may not be that far off. And even conservatives haven't been particularly conservative when it comes to economic policy in any of this. They haven't spoken up like they should have been. And they're the people who you expect to have some kind of economic sense, but they've been largely quiet. Similarly, they've actually been remarkably quiet when it comes to people's rights. And then there's, of course, President Trump, who I think got tricked in all of this because he trusted the swamp rats that surround him as his advisors. He trusted them over his own judgment, which I think would have been better. The most, I guess, apparent of them would be Fauci, who I tried to expose before, but apparently the right people weren't listening. All I can say is, speak up now, because things are going to keep escalating. When you have people who are power hungry, and by the way, politicians tend to be power hungry, when you have those people who realize that they have newfound power, they're going to keep pushing and pushing. Like a child who's trying to figure out where the boundaries are. That's what we have It's going to get worse and worse until people start speaking up and saying, actually, no, we have rights, and you will listen to our rights. That's what needs to happen. Until it does, this will continue. Wait, if you enjoyed that video, please remember to like and share. I can't grow without you. Also, if you want to be reliably notified of new videos, don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter. If you're able to support the production of these videos, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe at Subscribestar, or maybe get one of the healthier products, or even get some merch.